Have you ever judged someone based entirely on where they come from?
Oh, definitely. We all do it.
Right. Or maybe think about your own workplace or your social circle.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have someone in mind right now, someone who sits in the corner, never speaks up in meetings, maybe wears headphones all day.
Just makes themselves as physically small as possible.
Exactly. And we tend to just write those people off as antisocial.
Yeah, you look at their posture, maybe their last name, their postcode.
And your brain just automatically fills in the blanks.
It does. It builds a whole narrative.
But what happens when those blanks are just completely fundamentally wrong?
When the narrative is entirely backwards.
Right. What if the person you've written off as invisible is actually hiding in plain sight?
That's the real question.
Today's deep dive is going to completely dismantle those assumptions you might not even realize you have. We are stepping into a world where the quietest, most trembling person in the room is actually carrying the heaviest, most dangerous secrets imaginable.
And on the flip side of that coin, we are going to examine a world where the loudest, most commanding, and most privileged presence in the room might be entirely blind to the visceral reality playing out right in front of them.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a phenomenal study in contrasts, power dynamics, and survival.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Today, our mission is to explore the incredibly complex layers of a story that, if you only look at the cover, might seem like a straightforward contemporary romance.
Which is incredibly deceptive.
It really is, because once you peel back the first layer, you realize it is hiding a gritty, high-stakes psychological thriller right inside its pages.
Yes.
The source material we are diving into today is the book Lawmater, which is book 1 of 2 in the Aristocrats of London series by Susie Tate.
And let me tell you, we have an incredible stack of material to go through for this deep dive.
We really do. This is a story that tackles extreme generational wealth, violent organized crime, neurodivergence, and the deeply hidden, incredibly painful scars of domestic abuse.
It really is a dense and rich set of sources today. We are looking at extensive excerpts from the novel itself.
Which is great.
Yeah, it gives us the vital, direct inner monologues of our two main characters, Clara and Rafe.
And that internal perspective is going to be crucial for our psychological analysis today.
Absolutely crucial. We also have a substantial excerpt from the sequel, Deal Breaker, which shifts the focus to a different character entirely.
Plus, we have a deeply illuminating author's note from Susie Tate.
Right, discussing her real-world professional experience with victims of domestic abuse.
Yes, that author's note completely recontextualizes everything you read in the fiction.
It grounds the entire narrative in a really sobering reality.
It does. But before we get to the heavy psychological lifting, let's set the stage.
Let's do it.
Let's introduce our two colliding worlds. First, we have Clara Bell Mason.
But she operates almost entirely under the radar.
Right. She is a teaching assistant at Molton Prep. Now, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the landscape of elite British education,
What's intense?
Molton Prep is not your average neighborhood primary school. This is an ultra-exclusive, eye-wateringly expensive London institution.
Can be parents dropping off their kids in the morning are dukes, lords, billionaires, titans of industry.
And Clara. She is actively trying to be invisible in this environment of extreme wealth.
Which is an incredibly specific choice.
It really is. She hides behind thick-rimmed glasses, baggy, oversized woolly jumpers.
Thick, opaque tights.
Yes, and a heavy fringe that covers half her face. She describes her own presence as mousy.
And she has deliberately, consciously taken a lower-paid teaching assistant role.
Specifically because her contract in that role stipulates that she never has to interact directly with the parents.
If we pause and look at that from a psychological standpoint, that is our first major red flag.
Oh, absolutely.
When someone goes to such extreme lengths to achieve complete anonymity, to ensure they have an ironclad, contractually mandated excuse to avoid adults.
Particularly powerful, wealthy adults.
Exactly. It speaks to a profound, deeply ingrained need for self-preservation. You have to ask yourself, what is she preserving herself from?
Right.
She isn't just introverted. She isn't just shy. She is hiding.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yes. Her silent observation, as she categorizes it in her inner monologue, is a learned survival technique. It's the freeze response of the central nervous system made into a lifestyle.
The freeze response. That makes so much sense. She's trying to be the piece of furniture that a predator doesn't notice.
Precisely.
But her carefully constructed survival technique, her invisibility cloak, is put to the ultimate test by a 7-year-old boy.
Oscar Sterling.
Yes, Oscar, who goes by Ozzy. Ozzy is having a really tough time in class. He's acting out, he's frustrated,
Our very first introduction to him involves him aggressively ripping pages out of his reading book.
and physically throwing the book at a classmate.
And that classmate is a little girl named Margot Harding, who is a fascinating side character.
Margot is amazing. She is the daughter of a duke, and she is an absolute firecracker of a child.
We get a throwaway detail that she recently locked a substitute teacher in a supply cupboard.
Which tells you everything you need to know about the sense of entitlement and sheer unruliness at this school.
But to bring it back to Ozzy after he throws the book, Clara intervenes.
Right.
She pulls him aside gently, and Ozzy, the 7-year-old child, actually admits to her that throwing the book was a dick move.
I genuinely laughed out loud at that detail in the text. You have this tiny 7-year-old aristocrat using the phrase dick move.
And Margot, the girl he just threw the book at.
She's just standing there nodding in solemn agreement like, yeah, mate, it absolutely was.
It's such a funny, authentic kid moment.
It really is.
It provides great levity, but it masks a deep, profound insecurity.
Oh, for sure.
When Clara sits down with him, Ozzy says he hates books. He says his brain works funny and he gets his letters mixed up constantly.
Yeah, he confesses to Clara that he feels stupid because the other kids have noticed he has to use different yellow-tinted paper for his assignments.
What we are seeing here is a classic presentation of profound dyslexia.
Right.
And because it hasn't been properly framed for him, it is severely, perhaps permanently, impacting his self-esteem.
And this is where we see Clara's absolute brilliance shine through.
Yeah.
Because she might be terrified of the billionaire parent.
Terrified of her own shadow, really.
Yeah, but with these kids, she is an absolute rock star. She doesn't talk down to him.
Not at all.
She gets on his level and explains that having dyslexia just means he has a completely different type of brain and that thinking differently isn't a bad thing at all.
It's actually a superpower.
Exactly.
The pedagogy Clara employs in this scene is incredibly accurate, which directly mirrors the author's real-world consultations.
Right, because if you look at the acknowledgement section of the source material,
Susie Tate explicitly thanks a dyslexia expert named Jenny Walker.
and that consultation is heavily evident in the text. Clara doesn't just offer platitudes. She uses specific, evidence-based tools.
Give me some examples of that for anyone listening who might not be familiar with how dyslexia is actually managed in a modern classroom.
Well, Clara uses dyslexia-friendly fonts. These are fonts specifically designed with heavier bottoms to prevent the letters from seeming to flip or float on the page.
Fascinating.
She uses wider spaced lines to prevent visual crowding.
Mm-hmm.
And she uses colored paper, specifically yellow in Ozzy's case.
Yellow.
Because for many people with dyslexia, the stark contrast of black ink on a bright white background causes visual stress. The words can literally appear to vibrate or blur.
Wow.
So the yellow paper softens that contrast and helps the brain process the visual information much more smoothly. She also engages him in awesome alliterations games.
To help his brain sort out phonetic sounds.
Right, and identify letter groupings in a low-stakes, playful way.
And beyond the technical tools, she rebuilds his shattered confidence with relatable role models.
Yeah, she asks him, do you think Albert Einstein is stupid?
And when that historical reference doesn't quite land with the 7-year-old,
She immediately pivots to, how about Tom Cruise?
Ozzy's mind is completely blown.
Right, Tom Cruise, the guy who jumps out of airplanes and rides motorcycles off cliffs,
Yeah.
has dyslexia.
It completely reframes his condition from a shameful deficit to just a different, perhaps even exciting way of operating in the world.
Exactly. What Clara is doing here is providing him with emotional safety.
That is a concept we are going to return to again and again as we unpack these sources.
Emotional safety.
Yes, she creates a microenvironment in her classroom where Ozzy doesn't have to be defensive.
Where he doesn't have to act out to mask his struggles.
But of course, the grand tragedy of the narrative is that this safe little bubble Clara has painstakingly created
Is about to be violently punctured by Ozzy's father.
Oh boy, is it ever.
Enter Lord Rafe Sterling. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
Rafe is a literal giant of a man. The text describes him as well over 6 feet, impossibly broad shoulders, wearing tailored three-piece Savile Row suits,
Ice blue eyes.
and a deep, commanding voice that sounds like it was honed by centuries of his ancestors ruling over peasants.
He is one of the most renowned, feared criminal barristers in the entire country.
And he is currently on track to be one of the youngest high court judges ever appointed in the UK.
He is intimidating. He is deeply arrogant.
And he is a man who is entirely used to getting exactly what he wants the very millisecond he demands it.
And right now, what he wants is to meet this mysterious Miss Clara his son won't stop talking about at home.
Right. He's frustrated. He is paying exorbitant school fees.
He is a major financial benefactor to the school itself.
And yet, this low-level teaching assistant is actively refusing to meet with him, citing her contract.
He views this as an unacceptable insubordination,
He threatens to go over everyone's heads straight to the Board of Governors.
which essentially forces the headmistress, Mrs. Clayton, to orchestrate an unavoidable face-to-face meeting.
Let's talk about Mrs. Clayton for a
Hey,
second.
please do.
Because she is an absolute delight. We find out she was actually Rafe's form teacher 30 years ago when he was a student.
Yes.
So while Rafe is terrifying the entire faculty and throwing his aristocratic weight around,
Mrs. Clayton is looking at this giant, terrifying barrister and essentially going, "Don't you dare throw your weight around in my office, Rafe."
right, she says, "I've seen you shove blue tack up your nose and cry when a girl pushed you in a puddle."
It is such a brilliant, grounding way to immediately deflate his aristocratic posturing for the reader.
It's hilarious. But it serves a vital narrative function, too.
It really does. It shows you, the listener, that Rafe, despite his immense, almost unchecked power in his adult life, still respects the authority figures from his past.
He allows Mrs. Clayton to scold him.
He accepts her boundaries.
But it also brutally highlights the contrast with Clara.
Exactly. When Rafe finally does meet Clara, she doesn't have Mrs. Clayton's shared history
Or her institutional authority.
or her rock-solid confidence to fall back on.
Right. So the inevitable meeting finally happens. Rafe towers over her in this small classroom.
And Clara is so utterly, viscerally paralyzed by fear and shyness that she literally cannot make her vocal cords work.
Her internal monologue describes her heart rate stuttering. She feels like she might spontaneously self-combust.
Rafe is firing off these sharp, condescending remarks, asking if her hairdressing duties with the little girls can wait.
Which is so rude.
Incredibly rude. And Clara is just staring at the knot of his silk tie, communicating solely by frantically nodding her head.
To a man like Rafe, this reaction is inexplicable.
He interprets this freeze response as either staggering incompetence or deliberate mocking obstinance.
He asks her, incredibly rudely, "Do you, by any chance, actually speak?"
Think about who Rafe is. He's a top-tier barrister. His entire life, his career, his wealth are all built on verbal dominance,
Quick articulation.
intellectual sparring. Encountering someone who simply shuts down, who becomes mute in his presence, is totally foreign and deeply frustrating to him.
But then, the tectonic plates shift. Rafe, in his arrogance, challenges her assessment of his son.
Oh, this is the
He
moment.
tells her not to fill Ozzy's head with unproven ideas about his brain working differently without a formal medical assessment.
He is dismissing her expertise entirely.
And that, it turns out, is the exact wrong thing to say to Clarabelle Mason.
Because, while Rafe doesn't know it, his dismissal threatens Ozzy's emotional safety.
And Clara's deeply ingrained protective instincts for a vulnerable child entirely override her visceral terror of the aggressive adult in the room.
Exactly. Rafe's internal monologue describes the physical transformation perfectly.
He notes that she goes from a terrified mouse to a bristling, hissing kitten in under 60 seconds.
Clara finds her voice. It starts as a painful stutter, but she forcefully pushes through it.
She tells Rafe it is supremely important that Ozzy doesn't fall behind so his confidence isn't permanently affected.
And then she asks the hardest, most dangerous question imaginable to a man like this.
She asks Rafe, point blank, looking him in the eye, if there is anyone at home who has been impatient with Ozzy.
Anyone who might be making him feel stupid.
Stop and imagine the sheer audacity required for that moment.
It's wild. You have someone in Clara's position, a terrified, lower-tier employee, a woman who goes out of her way to be invisible.
Accusing a man of Rafe's massive stature, wealth, and known temper of essentially emotionally neglecting or bullying his own child.
It is a breathtaking risk. Rafe immediately drops into his cold courtroom interrogation voice.
He asks her, very quietly, "Are you accusing me of lacking patience with my son, Clara?"
And she immediately starts shaking like a leaf again. Her nervous system is screaming at her to run.
But she doesn't back down on the core issue. In a later confrontation, which actually takes place at his house,
She explicitly forbids him from making Ozzy feel less than he is.
she points her finger at him and says, "I won't stand for it, okay?"
Her hands are clenched into tight fists. She's practically in tears from the sheer, overwhelming stress of standing up to him.
But she defends that little boy fiercely. And what's Rafe's reaction to this lower-class teaching assistant forbidding him from doing something?
He doesn't explode. He doesn't fire her.
He smirks.
He smirks because he's entirely disarmed by her courage. In his world, people either shrink away from him entirely, terrified of his power,
Or they aggressively fight back out of their own pride and ego.
right. Clara is fighting solely for his son, at immense personal cost, and he immediately validates her.
He drops the arrogance. He tells her, I'm sorry.
He explains that he actually fired Ozzy's previous nanny because he caught her speaking to Ozzy terribly about his reading.
And he gives Clara his absolute word that he takes his son's emotional well-being more seriously than anything else in the world.
It's a huge turning point in their dynamic.
It really is. But let's rewind slightly, because to truly understand why Clara is so fiercely, desperately protective of Ozzy's emotional safety.
We have to understand the absolute terrifying lack of physical and emotional safety in her own life.
Exactly. This brings us to the second major theme of our deep dive today, the illusion of safety and the reality of abuse.
Yes, the text takes a very dark, very sobering turn here. We learn through her inner monologue that Clara is living a fractured dual life.
The quiet, predictable school environment with the children is her only refuge from a living nightmare.
One morning, Clara shows up to work as a coworker, very bluntly puts it, like she's gone a couple of rounds in a boxing ring with Muhammad Ali.
She has severe, dark bruising on her face. She has a newly broken wrist.
And when she's questioned by the children, by Ozzy, by the other teachers, and eventually by Rafe himself,
She defaults to the most classic, universally recognized, and tragic excuse in the book.
I fell down some stairs.
Or, I walked into a door in the dark.
Let's unpack that trope for a moment. Why do victims of domestic violence so often use the fell down the stairs excuse?
It's not because they think it's a brilliant lie that everyone will believe.
No, often it's a statement of enforced compliance. It's a way of signaling, I cannot talk about this, do not press me on this, I am establishing a wall.
And this is where Rafe's specific profession becomes critical to the narrative structure. As a top-tier criminal barrister, he routinely prosecutes violent offenders.
He deals with horrific domestic violence cases all the time. He looks at the specific pattern of Clara's injuries.
The defensive wounds, the facial bruising.
And his professional BS detector goes off immediately. He knows the mechanics of a fall versus the mechanics of a fist.
And more importantly, he knows the psychological profile of the victim standing in front of him.
He confronts her about it in his office. He doesn't let her deflect.
He tells her, flat out, you're not fooling anyone with the fall down the stairs story.
He assumes, completely naturally given the statistics, that it's an abusive, controlling boyfriend.
He tells her the man who did this won't stop, that it will inevitably escalate, and he even offers to leverage his contacts to help her quietly find a secure women's refuge.
What's fascinating here is Clara's internal monologue during this intense confrontation.
Because as Rafe is offering her a traditional escape route, she thinks to herself, a women's refuge would never have been an option.
She knows a terrifying truth that Rafe hasn't even begun to fathom. This isn't a bad boyfriend.
This isn't a domestic squabble.
This is something much, much bigger and vastly more dangerous.
We learn, horrifyingly, that she has old stitch marks on her temple. She lives by a very specific, brutal code.
Snitches get stitches.
She specifically notes to herself that there aren't many rules in her family's world, but that is the primary, unbreakable one.
If you talk to the police, if you go to a refuge where the authorities might be alerted, you pay in blood.
We find out she routinely ignores the police when they try to talk to her after neighbors report disturbances.
She says she's become an expert at dealing with them. She just stares blankly and ignores them until they eventually go away.
Because in her mind, staying utterly silent is her only viable survival tactic.
She thinks to herself that she won't be much help to her teenage younger brother, Zach, if she's found dead at the bottom of the River Thames.
If we expand on this and connect it to the broader psychological picture, Clara is demonstrating the profound systemic effects of coercive control.
Coercive control is a term we hear a lot now, but for anyone listening who might not know the exact definition,
It isn't just about physical violence.
no, it is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, isolate, and completely dominate a victim. It strips away their autonomy.
Clara's absolute silence, her mousy demeanor, her oversized, shapeless clothes, these aren't quirky personality traits.
They are deeply ingrained trauma responses. She is trying to make herself as small a target as possible in a world where being noticed means being hurt.
when Rafe tries to aggressively interrogate her about her injuries, trying to force her to name her abuser.
He accidentally triggers her PTSD.
He grabs her arms just to physically steady her.
And she violently wrenches away, utterly, blindly terrified.
And Rafe, to his credit, realizes it instantly. He backs off, he holds his hands up in surrender.
And he says something so incredibly perceptive that it gave me chills when I read it.
He says, very softly, I want you to know that I'm not stupid, Clara. People don't react the way you just reacted. Not people who are safe.
It's a pivotal realization for him. He finally understands that he isn't just dealing with a shy woman.
He is dealing with a deeply traumatized individual whose entire nervous system is wired for constant threat detection.
But this raises a really important, almost contradictory question for us to examine.
Which is?
If Clara is so fundamentally traumatized by aggressive, dominating men, which we know her abusers are, why does she eventually allow Rafe to essentially kidnap her and move her into his house?
Right, I was thinking the exact same thing. Because Rafe literally shows up at the school a few days later, decides unilaterally that her flat is unsafe.
Packs her single, tiny bag of belongings.
And moves her into his massive, high-security mansion in Putney. He doesn't ask. He issues it as a command.
And Clara, despite her ingrained fear of dominant men, just goes along with it. Explain the psychology there, because on paper that sounds insane.
It does sound contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we have to break down what dominance means in different contexts.
Okay.
Clara has been raised in an environment where male dominance is exclusively used to crush, to control, to extract, and to harm. It is predatory dominance.
Rafe is dominant, yes. He is commanding, he issues orders.
But his dominance is entirely singularly protective. He uses his immense power, his vast wealth, and his sheer, imposing physical size
to create an impenetrable barrier between Clara and the terrifying world outside.
That makes a lot of sense. The text actually says she felt like a stray cat that had been taken in from the freezing street and was having to be cautiously house-trained.
But despite her hesitation, she secretly loves it.
She notes the heavy electric gates closing behind them, the complicated state-of-the-art alarm system.
She calls the house practically a fortress.
And for someone who has literally never known a single day of physical safety in her entire life, that fortress is intoxicating.
It provides the very first environment where her nervous system can actually begin to downregulate.
And for anyone who hasn't studied trauma, think of a traumatized nervous system like a car engine that has been constantly revving in the red zone for years, waiting for an impact.
Stepping behind those electric gates in Putney is the first time she is able to put the car in park and turn the key off.
The cortisol stops flooding her system. And because she finally feels physically safe, we start to see the real, unburdened Clara slowly emerge.
And the real Clara is hilarious.
Deeply observant.
And desperately, unapologetically thirsty for her boss.
Listen to the incredible details the author gives us about her time living in this house. There's Martha, the warm, motherly Welsh chef who insists on feeding Clara 3 massive meals a day to help her gain weight.
There's Rafe leaving his high-stakes legal chambers early just to come home and hear Ozzy practice reading.
And getting genuinely choked up with tears when his son successfully reads a whole page to him.
And then there is Clara's vivid internal monologue about Rafe's massive granite kitchen island.
Yes, the cognitive dissonance the author portrays here is quite stark and very human.
She is a battered, traumatized victim on one hand, and a young woman experiencing intense, undeniable physical attraction on the other.
She fully admits to herself that she has these wild, utterly depraved fantasies about Rafe.
Some of which heavily involve the kitchen worktops.
She even humorously notes in her inner monologue that her fantasies are disgusting from a food hygiene perspective.
It's such a brilliant, relatable way to show that despite the horrific trauma she's endured, her humanity, her desires, and her sense of humor are all still perfectly intact.
She isn't broken. She's just been suppressed. And it's the little things, the micro-attentions Rafe pays to her that truly win her over.
Like the Branston pickle.
Ah, Branston pickle. It seems like a mundane detail, but it's actually a crucial psychological touchstone in their relationship.
I love this detail. She likes the specific, small chunk size of Branston pickle for her sandwiches.
She mentions it once in passing, and suddenly jars of it just magically appear in the pantry.
Rafe is this terrifying, high-powered barrister working massive, career-defining cases at the Old Bailey.
But he notices what kind of cheap grocery store pickle his son's teaching assistant prefers, and he makes sure it's fully stocked.
It's those tiny specific attentions that prove to Clara that she is truly seen and valued as a human being, not just controlled as an object.
It's the difference between being perceived and being understood.
But of course, this idyllic domestic sanctuary they are building is resting on a massive foundation of volatile secrets.
Rafe, utilizing his professional framework, firmly believes he is protecting her from a violent, abusive ex-boyfriend.
Clara knows she is hiding from a vast, incredibly dangerous organized crime syndicate.
And these two completely disparate realities are on a high-speed collision course.
Which perfectly transitions us into the absolute chaos of the courtroom.
Let's talk about what's happening at Rafe's day job, because this is an absolute masterclass in building tension. Where is Rafe, and what is he doing while Clara is eating small chunk pickle in his kitchen?
Rafe is operating at the absolute pinnacle of his career. He is the lead prosecuting barrister on two interlinked, highly sensitive, high-profile cases.
He is prosecuting an East London crime syndicate specifically, a deeply entrenched family operation.
The case currently going to trial is against a man named Freddie Mason for a brutal, frenzied glassing attack on a nightclub bouncer.
For anyone outside the UK, glassing is a horrifying attack where someone smashes a glass or a bottle and uses it as a weapon.
In this case, Freddie tried to cut the line at a club. The bouncer stopped him, and Freddie attacked him with a broken, jagged vodka bottle.
It's incredibly violent, intimate, and visceral.
Mm.
And the prosecution's evidence is overwhelming.
They have clear CCTV footage of the attack. They have multiple corroborated eyewitnesses.
Rafe and his co-counsel, a brilliant shark-like barrister named Willow, have been meticulously preparing this specific case for 4 months.
It is airtight. It is a career-making conviction that is designed to act as the primary domino.
Once Freddie falls, it will lead directly into the much larger, complex case, taking down the entire family's dark web extortion and drug network.
So the stage is set. Rafe walks into court number 3 at the Old Bailey.
And let's picture this. The architecture of these courtrooms is literally designed to intimidate. It is packed to the rafters.
The press gallery is full. The victim's terrified family is there. The defendant's intimidating family is there.
Judge Catherine Harris, who happens to be a highly respected longtime mentor to Rafe, takes the bench.
Freddie Mason is brought up from the holding cells into the dock.
And Rafe, standing in his robes and wig, feeling entirely in control of his domain, casually looks over at the public gallery to assess the Mason family.
He notes the hardened mother. He notes the daughter sitting next to her.
He thinks back to his extensive case files. The daughter wasn't considered a primary person of interest by the police.
He loosely recalls her name from the hundreds of pages of files. Clarabelle Mason.
And then he actually focuses his eyes and looks at her face.
The moment of realization is described as a literal physical blow.
The text says his blood instantly ran cold and he froze right in the middle of the crowded courtroom.
The shy, trembling, oversized jumper-wearing teaching assistant who is currently living in his house,
The vulnerable woman he has inadvertently fallen deeply in love with,
is sitting directly behind the violent thug he is trying to put in prison.
she isn't just a bystander. She is Clarabelle Mason, the sister of the defendant in the dock, the daughter of the vicious crime boss.
It is an absolute, unmitigated nightmare scenario for a legal professional.
Put yourself in that courtroom. You are Rafe Sterling. You are seconds away from opening a massive, highly publicized trial.
And you suddenly realize you have been sleeping under the exact same roof as the defendant's immediate family member.
His mind immediately races to Ozzy, his own flesh and blood, his vulnerable 7-year-old child, who he left at home alone with a known gang member's sister.
The icy, blinding fury that shoots through him in that moment is, frankly, entirely justified based on the facts available to him.
He thinks he has been played for an absolute fool.
He assumes this was a highly sophisticated, months-long con by the Mason family to infiltrate the prosecution's home and compromise the trial.
And ethically, legally, his career is suddenly on fire. He is utterly, hopelessly compromised.
But he doesn't hesitate or try to hide it, which really speaks to his core integrity as a character.
He immediately addresses the judge before the jury is even brought in or the trial formally commences, and urgently requests a private meeting in her chambers.
He has a strict duty to the court, and he upholds it, even knowing it might destroy him.
The utter humiliation of that scene in the judge's chambers. I felt sick reading it.
He has to stand there in front of the opposing defense counsel, Priya Sharma, and confess to Judge Harris, his mentor, that he has an ongoing personal relationship with the defendant's sister.
That she is literally living in his house in Putney. Judge Harris's eyebrows are practically in her hairline.
She immediately accepts his recusal. The massive trial is indefinitely suspended.
And she essentially tells him with total disgust, do you have to go around shagging the criminal underbelly of London?
Rafe's entire professional life is suddenly hanging by a thread. He is facing an immediate, severe investigation by the Crown Prosecution Service for perverting the course of justice.
4 months of exhausting work are completely down the drain. He feels a profound, soul-crushing betrayal.
But the devastating tragedy of the narrative irony here is that we, the listener, know Clara isn't a spy.
No, she's not. She is completely innocent of that accusation. And this tragic misunderstanding leads to the most heartbreaking scene in the entire book.
The corridor scene.
After Rafe is unceremoniously thrown off his own case, he's walking through the stark courthouse corridor. Clara is out there, being gripped tightly by the arm by her father, Frank Mason, the crime boss.
She's as terrified of her father. But when she sees Rafe walking towards her, she looks at him and she sees the absolute, unadulterated hatred burning in his eyes.
And in that moment, something massive clicks for her.
She realizes who he really is. She realizes that Rafe Sterling isn't just a wealthy parent. He is a man of immense systemic power.
He is entirely in his element here. He wields the terrifying power of the British legal system.
And she realizes, tragically too late, that he is one of the only men on earth powerful enough to actually protect her from her family.
She breaks away from her father's bruising grip. She runs to Rafe in the middle of this public corridor.
She grabs the front of his crisp shirt, tears streaming from her eyes, and she begs him. She says, "I need your help, Rafe."
And Rafe, completely blinded by his own professional humiliation, his fear for his son, and the rigid assumption of her guilt,
delivers a devastating, cruel rejection.
He looks down at her and tells her in a low, dark, terrifying voice, "I wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire."
He lumps her in entirely with her violent family, calling them all disgusting, and tells her he's sure they'll all land on their feet despite the trial setback, because your kind always do.
Your kind. It's such a loaded, incredibly classist phrase. It is a verbal slap to the face.
Clara is utterly crushed. Her internal monologue in that moment is so sad. She thinks to herself, I was a product of them, wasn't I?
She internalizes his disgust. She feels the deep shame of complicity, even though she was the primary victim of that household herself.
So let's unpack this for the listener. Why was she in that courtroom if she wasn't spying on Rafe?
If we pull back and look at the macro plot, we finally discover the truth about Clara's actual role in this syndicate. She isn't a spy for her family.
She is the spy for the police. She is the deeply embedded, highly confidential informant.
She is the big, terrible thing. That's what she calls her secret in her head.
Exactly. Clara is the one who provided the police with the complex access codes to the encrypted dark web messaging network that her family uses to run their entire extortion, violence, and drug rings.
She is the sole reason the police have any evidence to take down the Mason syndicate in the first place.
She did it out of sheer desperation to try and save her teenage younger brother Zach from being pulled into the life, and to try and free her broken mother Marie from her father's brutal daily abuse.
She literally risked her life, knowing with absolute certainty that snitches get stitches, knowing her father would kill her if he found out, to bring down her own flesh and blood.
And Rafe's instantaneous assumption of her guilt, his complete inability to see her as anything other than a criminal accomplice the second he heard her last name, highlights the massive gaping blind spots of his systemic privilege.
He literally could not fathom that someone trapped inside that criminal system could be a victim actively trying to dismantle it.
It's a classic textbook failure of empathy, driven entirely by the rigid black and white structures of his privileged world.
To a man on track to be a high court judge, you are either the law or you are the criminal.
There is no gray area, there are no victims of circumstance until Clara's reality violently forces him to see it.
Which brings us to the explosive fallout of that realization. After the courtroom disaster, Clara is dragged back to her family's heavily fortified house in East London.
And the consequences for her are brutal.
Her father, Frank, assumes Clara deliberately slept with the prosecuting barrister, specifically to get him compromised and thrown off Freddie's case.
He thinks she is a master manipulator, but when he finds out from her that she didn't even ask Rafe to go easy on her brother,
that she actually hid her identity from him,
Frank is completely enraged. This is where the grim reality of domestic violence escalation is shown.
We learn that Frank has been physically beating Clara for years. Those horrifying injuries Rafe saw earlier, the broken wrist, the dark bruises, that wasn't a boyfriend.
That was her own father.
And now she is trapped back in that house with him, entirely cut off from the outside world.
But thankfully, Rafe doesn't stay in his bubble of righteous ignorance for long.
He goes back to Molton Prep, full of anger, demanding that Clara be immediately fired for her deception.
He starts yelling at Mrs. Clayton and Lily, the eccentric teacher with the pineapple tights.
And those two women, in an incredible display of loyalty, firmly stand their ground. They defend Clara.
Lily actually looks at this terrifying giant lord and calls him a stone-cold fuckwaffle right to his face.
Which is brilliant. It might be the most incredibly British insult I've ever heard in my life, but it completely disarms him.
It's a wonderful juxtaposition of class and power. Rafe is entirely used to total deference from everyone around him.
But these primary school teachers see the vulnerable human being that he completely missed. They know Clara's true character.
Rafe's arrogant certainty finally begins to crack. He leaves the school and calls Detective Inspector Grant Mitchell, who is the lead police officer on the Mason Crime Syndicate case.
And through a tiny slip of the tongue, Grant casually refers to the informant as Clara instead of her full name. Clarabelle Rafe's brilliant legal mind puts the pieces together.
He figures it out in an instant. He realizes Clara is Grant's highly protected, deeply embedded source.
And if that realization wasn't enough to shatter him, Clara's teenage brother, Zach, unexpectedly shows up at Rafe's house in Putney.
Zach is terrified, he's shaking, but he tells Rafe the truth about the big, terrible thing.
He tells him Clara snitched to the cops to save them, and that Frank has her locked up.
And suddenly, the horrifying magnitude of his mistake crashes down on Rafe.
He realizes he left the innocent woman he loves entirely in the violent hands of the crime boss she just betrayed to the police.
This sparks the massive rescue mission, and I have to say, the author expertly balances incredible life-or-death high stakes with some truly dark, absurd humor in these chapters.
Yes, because Rafe speeds over to the Mason stronghold in East London, preparing for a confrontation, and what does he find parked outside on the street?
A clapped-out, beat-up Ford Focus containing Mrs. Clayton, the 65-year-old headmistress, and Lily, the eccentric primary school teacher.
Rafe taps on the window and asks them what on earth they are doing in East London.
And Lily, whispering furiously like she's in a spy movie, says, "We're here to case the joint."
It is so incredibly funny and touching. These two women, whose daily lives consist of wrangling chaotic 7-year-olds and organizing glittery nativity plays,
Are sitting outside a literal mafia stronghold ready to mount a rescue op for their friend.
Rafe is exasperated. He tells them they have absolutely zero cover, they stick out like sore thumbs in this neighborhood, and they need to lock the doors and leave it to him.
Lily asks, "What are you going to do? They'll kill you."
And Rafe's response tells you everything you need to know about his profound worldview.
This is a crucial piece of dialogue. He says, in broad daylight, they're going to kill a barrister, right out here in public. We're not in Sicily.
They may have a couple of bent coppers on their payroll, but they don't own the judicial system. This is the United Kingdom, and this is London.
If they are keeping a woman imprisoned against her will, they're going to give her back immediately, and they will pay in a court of law.
He doesn't act like an action hero. He acts like an aristocrat.
Yeah.
He literally walks up to the heavily guarded front door of a violent crime boss and simply knocks.
He doesn't bring a SWAT team in riot gear.
The police are staging nearby, but Rafe walks up to the door wearing a perfectly tailored, bespoke, Savile Row three-piece suit.
It is the literal weaponization of aristocratic entitlement. He is wearing his class's armor.
He forces his way in and finds Clara, who has been badly beaten by her father again.
And the resulting verbal confrontation between Rafe Sterling and Frank Mason is, without a doubt, the thematic climax of the entire book.
Frank starts yelling that Rafe has no warrant, no right to barge into his private property, trying to assert his street power.
And Rafe delivers a speech that completely surgically deconstructs the power dynamics of British society.
Oh, I have to read this part. Listen to this. Rafe looks at this crime boss and says, "Families like mine have been in charge of this country for centuries. Do you think we came by that level of power lightly?
Do you think for a moment we aren't many times more ruthless than you?"
There's a bridge in Bath that in order to cross, you have to pay £1 to my family. People have been paying to cross that bridge since the 1600s.
When it comes to extortion, Frank, you're light years behind us.
It's a breathtaking, incredibly cynical admission.
Let's really look at what he's saying here. Rafe is openly acknowledging that the British aristocracy is, in its historical origins, just a vastly more successful institutionalized version of exactly what Frank Mason is doing in East London today.
How did the lords get their land? through historical violence, conquest, and taking from others.
The only difference is that the Sterling's extortion has been legalized, sanitized by history, and deeply embedded into the very fabric of the nation.
Frank is a street thug. Rafe is the system itself.
It's chilling. He tells Frank, I have the full support of the police, the judiciary, the government, and the very people I extort. You should have thought twice before you decided to yank the chain of a member of the aristocracy, you stupid F.
He completely emasculates the crime boss. Not with physical violence, not with a gun, but with the absolutely crushing, unavoidable weight of systemic historical power.
It's a brilliant narrative choice because it shows Rafe finally using his immense, frankly unfair privilege for something purely protective.
He isn't just acting as a lawyer anymore. He is a lord claiming what is his and utilizing every single lever of state and social power to totally annihilate the threat to Clara.
And it works seamlessly. The police swarm the place immediately after. Frank Mason is arrested, knowing he is lost.
And Clara is finally rescued from her childhood hell, which transitions us into the aftermath. Let's talk about the healing process, the humor, and her introduction to high society.
The immediate aftermath of the rescue is very telling. Clara is rushed to the hospital for observation and treatment of her injuries.
But even in the hospital, her trauma brain is working. She tries to leave early because she thinks she can't afford the private care Rafe has arranged.
She assumes that now that her family's dirty secret is fully out in the open, Rafe will be disgusted by her and completely done with her.
But Rafe is sitting right there in the hospital chair, refusing to leave her side. He takes her back to the Sterling fortress in Putney, and he makes her a vow.
He promises her he is going to tidy it all away.
And when a Sterling says they're going to tidy it away, they mean it. He means he's going to use every legal avenue to make sure her father and his violent cronies rot in a maximum security prison forever.
And slowly, finally safe, Clara begins to truly heal. And this is where the author brings back that brilliant, necessary comic relief.
Because Clara is determined to return to work at Molton Prep just in time for the big school play.
And you have to appreciate the author's sense of irony here. What are the 7-year-olds of Molton Prep performing for their parents?
Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
You literally cannot make this up. Lily, the teacher in charge, thought Chicago was entirely too mature for primary schoolers, so they inexplicably went with the musical about a serial killer slitting people's throats and baking them into meat pies.
The set is made entirely of painted cardboard, glitter, and aluminum foil.
The juxtaposition is vital for the pacing of the story. Clara has just narrowly survived a harrowing, life-threatening ordeal with a real-life violent crime syndicate.
And now, mere days later, she is backstage in a school gymnasium, desperately trying to stop 7-year-old Margot Harding, the Duke's tiny daughter, from enthusiastically practicing her throat-slitting motion with a plastic straight razor.
Lily literally has to whisper to the kid, ease up on the enthusiasm, Sweeney. Save it for the performance.
And little Ozzy is spinning around in Mrs. Clayton's expensive office chair, dramatically practicing his death throes.
Mrs. Clayton even has to give a solemn speech to the billionaire parents beforehand, warning those of a sensitive disposition that the play contains scenes of enthusiastic violence.
It's so absurd, so deeply funny, and it perfectly expertly cuts the dark tension of the previous chapters. Why is that humor so important in a story about trauma?
Because trauma isn't a monolith. Survivors still laugh, they still experience absurdity. The humor serves to ground Clara back in a safe, predictable, albeit chaotic, reality.
It shows that she isn't defined solely by her abuse. And crucially, this play is where the entire Sterling family shows up in force to support Ozzy.
This isn't just Rafe, it's his imposing father, the Earl, his elegant mother, the Countess, his terrifying grandmother, the Dowager, and his famous sister, Poppy.
I love the Sterling family so much. They are the definition of zero fucks given aristocracy.
Oh.
Earlier in the book, when Rafe's incredibly snobby, elitist ex-wife Sophia shows up and tries to verbally bully Clara,
The Earl of Sterling steps in and essentially threatens to financially ruin Sophia's father's estate if she doesn't back off.
they do not care about politeness. They care about loyalty.
Right.
And they completely unconditionally embrace Clara and her teenage brother, Zach.
The Earl even brings Zach a literal black Labrador puppy at one point because Zach mentioned he wants to be a vet.
This total acceptance culminates in the charity gala scene. This is the final, triumphant step in Clara's psychological journey from a terrified, mousy woman hiding her identity behind thick glasses to a woman standing publicly, proudly in her truth.
The gala is a massive, highly publicized event to raise money for domestic violence charities and women's refuges. Poppy Sterling organized the whole thing.
Rafe is the keynote speaker, and Clara is there, out of her oversized jumpers, wearing a stunning, tailored pink dress, standing out in the open for the press to see.
The Earl actually takes Clara aside during the party and tells her point blank, "We protect our own, Clara. You and Zach are under our protection now. You're a Sterling." And nobody fucks with a Sterling.
It is the ultimate, immovable validation of her physical and social safety.
And then, in the grand finale, Rafe pulls her right into the middle of the crowded corridor, completely ignores his usual rigid English aristocratic restraint, kisses her senseless in front of the cameras, and demands that she marry him.
She jokes, breathless, that it sounds more like a command than a question, and he readily agrees. It's the perfect sweeping romantic resolution.
But we must connect this glittering resolution back to the author's note we mentioned at the beginning.
Susie Tate reveals that she is a medical doctor, a GP who spent years working directly with victims of domestic abuse and women living in hidden refuges.
She writes directly to the reader, "I'm so sorry if anyone reading this does not feel safe in their own home. You are not alone."
That real-world context makes Clara's fictional journey so much more resonant and powerful. The specific patterns of bruising, the paralyzing fear, the intricate psychological traps of coercive control. The author didn't just invent those tropes for a cheap plot device.
She witnessed them firsthand in her medical practice. She honors those real-life survivors by giving Clara a story where she not only survives her abusers but finds absolute safety, total acceptance, and deep love.
It elevates the book from a standard, fluffy romance to something with real, lasting emotional gravity.
Absolutely. It grounds the escapist fantasy in a deeply empathetic reality.
Okay, so before we wrap up our analysis, we've got to look ahead. The provided text gives us a really intriguing teaser excerpt for Book 2 in the series, which is titled Deal Breaker.
And this book shifts the narrative focus entirely to Rafe's sister, Poppy Sterling.
Poppy is a fascinating pivot for the author. In Clara's book, Poppy appears to the reader as this completely unstoppable force of nature.
She's an extroverted, highly photographed, famous it girl. She runs the massive Sterling Foundation. She handles the aggressive paparazzi with total ease. She sweeps into every room she enters like a fun tsunami.
She seems utterly invulnerable.
But the excerpt from Deal Breaker immediately flips the script on us. We're suddenly inside Poppy's head as she prepares to co-host the massive UK Sporting Excellence Awards.
And we discover she is incredibly, painfully insecure. She's backstage asking her co-host, Josh, if her dress makes her look like a demented Tinkerbell.
Josh actually notes out loud that she is acting like an insecure weirdo, which completely shatters the illusion of her confident public persona.
This contrast raises an important question for the listener to ponder.
Yeah.
What causes this sudden, drastic shift in her demeanor?
We learn through her internal panic that Poppy is absolutely dreading an encounter with a very specific man at this event, Rory Wallace.
He is a grumpy, physically imposing Scottish rugby player who Poppy firmly believes absolutely hates her guts.
She notes that he constantly looks at her with withering looks and outright contempt whenever they are in the same room.
And Josh, her co-host, drops the absolute best meta-commentary on the situation. He listens to her complain and tells her that Rory is acting exactly like the start of an angsty romance novel, the grumpy brother's best friend who hates her for mysterious reasons.
It is so funny, and it perfectly sets up a classic grumpy sunshine dynamic for the next book.
But the narrative conflict escalates very quickly and very darkly on the red carpet. Poppy's trying to do her job, smiling for the cameras, when she's accosted by a different man, an aristocratic rugby player named Alistair Roxburgh.
Alistair has a known history of making cruel, highly misogynistic jokes in the press, and he clearly cannot handle the fact that Poppy has firmly rejected his advances multiple times in the past.
He approaches her aggressively, invades her personal space, and non-consensually touches her face.
Poppy completely freezes. The woman who can command a room full of A-list celebrities and billionaires is suddenly paralyzed, her heart hammering in her chest.
And who steps in to save her? Rory Wallace, the guy who supposedly hates her.
He stalks over, physically grabs Alistair's arm, yanks him away from Poppy, and aggressively snaps, "What the f do you think you're doing, mate?"
If we extrapolate the themes from this short excerpt, Book 2 is clearly going to move away from the intense, life-or-death physical danger of Clara's mafia story and delve deeply into the emotional and social vulnerabilities of Poppy's life in the unrelenting public eye.
Poppy seems completely untouchable because of her massive fame and her powerful Sterling name, but Alistair's gross entitlement clearly shows that she still faces very real predatory behavior from men in her social circle.
Rory stepping in so fiercely suggests that his supposed hatred is actually an intense, perhaps overbearing, protective focus. It promises a completely different flavor of romance, tension, and psychological exploration.
I am so ready to dive into that one next. It sounds fantastic. But let's bring it all back to Clara and Rafe to summarize today's incredible deep dive.
We started this whole conversation by asking if you ever judge someone based on their background or their quiet demeanor.
Clarabelle Mason, the terrified daughter of a vicious crime boss, proved that the most profound, world-altering courage can come wrapped in oversized woolly jumpers and trembling hands.
She brought down an entire criminal empire just to save her brother.
And Rafe Sterling proved that while systemic aristocratic privilege can be incredibly blinding, it can also be powerfully weaponized for good when it is finally utilized by someone willing to open their eyes and see the truth.
He used the centuries-old, entrenched power of the British aristocracy to act as an impenetrable shield for a victim of the criminal underworld.
It has been an incredible journey from a quiet, tension-filled primary school classroom to the high-stakes, terrifying drama of a London courtroom, culminating in a literal face-to-face battle of empires.
East London street crime versus the British aristocracy.
It is a phenomenal narrative, but I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay, let's hear it.
Rafe ultimately saves Clara by utilizing a centuries-old system of immense, unbalanced aristocratic power and historical influence. He leverages his vast wealth, his deep political connections, and his historical entitlement, which is the very definition of absolute, unquestionable systemic control.
Right.
So the deeply philosophical question is, does replacing the lawless, violent control of a crime syndicate with the institutional, highly systemic control of the aristocracy truly make Clara a free woman?
Wow.
Or has she simply traded one untouchable, dominating empire for a much nicer, much better dressed one? Is true individual autonomy actually possible when your physical and emotional safety relies entirely on the immense power of a lord?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy, brilliant question to leave off on, trading the mob for the manor. I love that perspective. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Lawmaker. We hope you learned something new about the psychology of survival, maybe laughed a little bit at the absurd image of a primary school Sweeney Todd play, and most importantly, that you might look at the quietest person in your office a little differently tomorrow. Until next time.